In today's video, we're going to be talking about weight loss, and we're going to be talking about why creating a calorie deficit is the only way that you can lose weight. And I know what you're thinking, you've probably seen a lot of different arguments across the internet as to why a calorie deficit doesn't work.
This calories in, calories out model doesn't work at all if you're trying to lose weight.
But I'm going to show you a very simple demonstration as to why creating a calorie deficit is the only way that your body can lose weight. Not only that, I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do to create a calorie deficit for yourself. I'm going to show you a visual representation of how our body burns energy. And I'm going to point out some of the common mistakes that you need to avoid when creating a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. So using this example, I'm going to show you why you need to be creating a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. But first, we need to understand what a calorie deficit is. If I pour some water into this cup, you'll notice that there is a hole at the bottom, and this represents the energy that we burn on a day-to-day basis, so how many calories we burn in a day. What you'll notice is, if I pour the same amount of water into the cup as what's coming out of the cup, then the level of the water in the cup doesn't change. This represents maintenance calories. It means we're consuming as many calories as what we're burning on a daily basis. But what happens if we start putting more into our cup than what's coming out the bottom? Then eventually the cup starts to fill up more and more, and this is what's called a calorie surplus. We've got more energy going in than what we've got coming out. When this happens, we're really likely to gain weight, and it's likely going to be in the form of body fat. Lastly, what happens if I start putting less water into the cup than what's coming out? You'll notice that even though there's still water going into the cup, slowly that water line is going to drop. And this same thing happens to our body. When we start consuming less energy, aka water that's going into the cup, and we start burning more, aka more water coming out of the cup, then eventually our total body weight is going to start to reduce. And this is how we lose body fat. And there's really two main ways that this can happen. We can put less water into the cup than what's going out, aka we are eating less food than what we're burning on a daily basis, or, bear with me for a second, we can make more water come out of the cup at a faster rate, aka we're burning more calories on a daily basis. That was probably a bit extreme. So let's get into the main point of today's video. How do we actually create a calorie deficit? There are two main steps that you need to follow. Step number one, you actually need to determine what your maintenance calories are first. So this is how much you need to eat on a daily basis to maintain your body weight. And to determine this, it first helps to actually understand how we burn energy. These weight plates represent the total amount of calories that you burn in a single day. Now these blue plates make up the majority of the calories that you burn in a day, and this represents your BMR, also known as your basal metabolic rate. This is essentially all of the energy required to just keep your body functioning on a day-to-day basis. Think about all of the energy required to pump and circulate blood around your body. Think about the energy that we need for cellular processes to occur, even simple things like breathing in oxygen. All of that stuff requires a large amount of energy, and that can equate for up to 60% of the total calories that you burn every single day. Next, we have this guy, which represents about 15% of the total calories that you burn in a day. And this is known as our NEAT, or our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is all of the activity that you do in a day which is non-exercise related. So think about going to work, cooking your food, cleaning the dishes, whatever it is where you're moving throughout the day, this represents the energy required to do so. Next, making up 10% of the calories that you burn on a daily basis, roughly, is our exercise related activity. So this could be going to the gym, going for a run, playing any form of sport. You'll notice that compared to the rest of the day, it actually doesn't account for how many calories you burn. And then lastly, rounding it out, we've got this little guy, equating to roughly 5% of the calories that you burn in a day. This is called our TEF, or our thermic defective food. Essentially what this means is that whenever we are consuming food, we actually require energy in order to break down that food. So things like protein sometimes require more energy, so this number can fluctuate a little bit. But if you refer back to the start of the video where I was pouring water in and out of the cup, think of all of this as the hole at the bottom of the cup, and this all represents the energy that you're burning on a daily basis. Now remember, when I talked about you can make the hole at the cup a little bit bigger so you have more energy coming out on a daily basis. Basically, the best way to do that is by increasing these two here, your non-exercise activity and your total exercise. But what you'll notice is that this still doesn't make up much of the calories that you burn in a single day. So even if you were to change these two things, it's not going to have a massive impact. So the next best thing that you can do is actually control how many calories you have coming in on a daily basis. So now we know exactly how we burn calories throughout the day. But how do we determine our maintenance calories? Well, we can actually use a special equation which uses our gender, our age, our height, and our weight. Think of all the blue plates, which I just showed you, plus our activity level. Think of the yellow and the green plates. This equation helps us determine how many calories we need to consume on a daily basis to maintain our body weight. But chances are you probably haven't done a maths equation since you dropped out of high school in year 10. So thankfully, we can use an online calculator which does all of the heavy hitting for us. All you need to do is simply jump onto Google or Bing if you're a bit of a weirdo, and type in calorie calculator. There are so many different options out there, but they're all pretty good and they're all gonna give you roughly the same output. So simply just click on the first one which pops up. Personally, I like to use this one and I'll leave the link for it in the description of this video. Now, all you need to do is input your info. And once you click submit, it's going to show you your maintenance calories. And this brings me to step 2. Now that you know your maintenance calories, you need to reduce this number to create a deficit. So remember, essentially what we're doing here is putting less water into the cup now to help us create a calorie deficit. Personally, I like to create a deficit of roughly 15 to 20% in total. This means I'm taking my maintenance calories and I'm reducing it by 15 to 20%. The reason I like to do this amount is because if we do any less than this, then chances are we're probably not gonna notice any significant changes, and it's likely that we won't be very motivated to continue with this. And if we do anything larger than 20%, then chances are it's gonna be really difficult to stick to because we're gonna be consuming a very low amount of calories, which means we're gonna have increased hunger, and it's just gonna be a lot harder to sustain that for a longer period of time. And that's a pretty big deal because being consistent in a calorie deficit is the key at the end of the day. So as an example, let's say that I determine my maintenance calories to be 2,500 calories per day. Now, if I subtract 15% from that, that will leave me with 2,125 calories per day. And we can do the same for 20%. So if we subtract 20% from 2,500, that's gonna leave us with 2,000 calories per day. And that's essentially it. You now know how to create a calorie deficit. The only thing you need to do from here is consume that amount of calories every single day for a very consistent period of time, and you are going to start losing weight. But before you leave, I do just want to point out a couple of key points or a couple of things that you need to avoid in order to be successful with this. Firstly, what I highly recommend before actually starting your calorie deficit is consuming your maintenance calories for at least 1 to 2 weeks. But why would we do this? See, a calorie deficit only works if you're being consistent. So the best thing that you can do is actually build some consistent eating habits first before you start your calorie deficit. And it's a lot easier to do this when you're at your maintenance calories because you're eating a little bit more food. So it's gonna make it easier for you to make some of those changes. Now, some of these habits might include tracking your food intake, planning out your meals, or even doing some meal prep, making sure you're consuming enough protein. Any little small changes that you need to make can be best to try and work on this before you start your calorie deficit. See, I see so many people who start a calorie deficit only to give up after a week or two because they struggled to build the necessary habits in order to keep them consistent for the long term. The next thing that you need to do is start tracking your progress. See, when we create a calorie deficit, at the end of the day, we're still guessing. These equations that we use are not 100% accurate. So the only way to actually tell if your deficit is working is to track your progress. Now, taking progress photos is actually the best way to track your progress because you can actually see a visual change over time, but it does take a little bit of time in order to see those changes. Now, tracking your body weight is a lot easier, but it doesn't give you the full picture. Some days your weight's gonna go up and some days it's gonna go down, even if you're doing everything perfectly. What you should focus on doing is tracking your average weight and then compare the average across the weeks. And if that average weight is slowly going down over time, then chances are you're on the right track. The next thing I want you to do is create a timeline. Don't just stick to your calorie deficit until you reach your goal weight. It is much more beneficial and sustainable to set a defined timeline such as 8 to 12 weeks, followed by a little bit of a break where you can reassess, and then once you've had a bit of a rest, determine if you want to enter another deficit. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, oh, this is going to take so long. Why don't I just push through and try and get it done all in one go? See, the longer that you're in a calorie deficit, the harder it gets. So if you keep going and your progress begins to stall, you're going to start to lose motivation, and this is going to increase your likelihood of rebounding and gaining back all of that weight that you've just lost. It's a lot easier to set defined periods where you can push through knowing that you're going to get a little bit of a chance to rest and reset and then go again. When thinking about it like this, it's important to ask yourself, do you want to lose a bunch of weight only to gain it back again in the future, or do you want to lose some weight and keep it off for good? Finally, you need to understand that you might need to make adjustments as you go. For example, when you first start your calorie deficit, after 8 weeks, if you keep eating that same amount of calories, it may no longer mean you're in a calorie deficit anymore. Because if you've lost weight, a lighter version of you may require less energy to function. Or as an example, it might look like this. Again, a little bit extreme, but because you now weigh less, your body doesn't need to burn as much energy in order to keep you functioning. So this means that the further you get into your deficit, you may need to reduce your calorie intake a little bit or increase the amount of calories that you are burning on a daily basis in order to keep making progress. So I will say only do this once you are sure that you are absolutely plateauing, and only do this if you're being consistent with your calorie deficit. Because the last thing you want to do is reduce your calorie intake further, making it even harder if you didn't need to. So if you were being really consistent with your deficit still, and only after a couple of weeks you were starting to notice a bit of a plateau, then that might be a good sign that you need to make some adjustments. So in conclusion, you should now know how and why a calorie deficit works. You should know how to calculate your maintenance calories, and you should know how to calculate your calorie deficit calories. Plus, you also know how and why your body burns energy throughout the day. And you even got some pretty good advice on some things you should do and avoid before starting your calorie deficit. Now, if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section of this video, and make sure you like and subscribe, as it really helps. Plus, if you found this useful, or if you think someone else would find this useful, please be sure to share it with them, and I'll catch you in the next video.